From here, I have choices I don't have through that. Let me relook at the world and make new choices from this place. I don't have to deal with that at all. I can, instead of doing that, I can now do this. And so now I have new choices, and so I act in new ways in the world, and I create a new experience. Okay. So we could say that that's what you just described.
No. That's not what I meant anyways.
Okay. That we get to a clearing.
I go, and I go, oh, I recognize it from this place. Oh, obvious, poison, nutrition. Oh. Okay. Boom. Step into it, right?
Yes. Okay, great. So let's say that what you just described, what you described the first time, and what I described are all trying to point to the same thing.
Yes.
Which is that you've got an interprojective lens through which you're seeing your life that has you.
Yes.
To put it in the transformational terms, right? It has you.
Yeah.
It's behind you. It's your context. And it gives you the content of problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we do is we take this interpretive lens and we bring it out here. And in that, the I that is interpreting it has freedom from that lens. And so we see new things. Now, the question is, isn't that being, that context, that clearing presupposed? Right? Doesn't that like exist in some way? And we're getting access to it. And here's what I would suggest. No, absolutely not. That clearing does not exist before we do the work. There is no I that's not part of that interprojection. It is in fact the process of coaching, the process of thinking that creates the space from which to see the thing.
But what is okay? Here's
and
the
nature of the space.
Okay, what
is
is
a
the
function
what
of
is
the type
the
of therapy.
context in which that thinking happens in? Like that, there's some kind of opening, and this is what I'm saying. I think that where the Buddhists were onto something here, that they say that it's like it's both empty and full,
which is where you get we're back to existence exists.
Yes.
Consciousness has a nature.
Yes.
Right. The nature of consciousness is that it identifies identity.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And it does it according to values.
Yes.
Integrity.
Yeah.
Right? Those values are inherent, intrinsic. They are part of our nature. That there's a core set of values.
Where core transformation gets
right.
to.
Which is sort of. That's exactly where I'm going, right? So the context in which the whole process happens is that consciousness identifies identity according to values, right? It interprets reality, and it projects its value onto it. And the values it cares about determines what it interprets, what it pays attention to, right? Like we walk into a room with books, and we actually pay attention to what's in the books. Other people walk into a room with books and they don't notice it at all. We care about information and knowledge, so we look for and notice things that are associated, right? What is the context in which that happens? We are consciousness. Consciousness have a nature. It has natural core values. And we could say that core transformation is designed to get down to those core values. And it does, but the way that it does it frames how we understand those values. Right? It is not the case that we take this context and just put it out there. And then what we have is an opening in which to see it. That's not what it is. It's that we take this context and we create a new perspective from which to look at it. And the nature of the perspective we create determines what we see. The clearing is a fundamentally creative process. It's not a subtractive process. It's not in some theoretical, right? It's a specific kind of not.
Okay. And what's the nature of that not, though?
It's a function of the language. Language houses being. When you use core transformation.
Okay, so you're actually saying that. So Heidegger said that language is the house of being.
And I'm using that because when we look at what is consciousness, we have to look at it from a perspective.
Yeah.
The perspective we choose is going to be built out of a very complex set of ideas that are all forms of consciousness interpreting existence. So we're never going to get a pure view at consciousness. We're always going to get a constructed view of consciousness, and that construction is a function of our language. Right? There's a bootstrapping process. We all inherit language.
Yeah.
And so we inherit the culture of that language. We inherit the interprojections of our culture and our language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That's the given.
We can't get out of that.
We can't get out of the fact that we're going to interproject.
Yeah.
And there are some ideas which are so deep and so presupposed that it's unlikely that we will ever get to them. But if we know what they are, if we've identified them, for example, I can come up to you and I can ask you questions. And I can point you to a particular set of presuppositions. And if I guide you to them, you can question them and transform them. You can unwork them. If there's a path there. And this is where we get into fourth stage learning, right? If first stage learning is learning from experience, second stage learning is learning from patterns, third stage learning is learning how to learn. Right? The fourth stage is about how to guide people to learn how to learn.
Yeah.
Right? Where, so like if someone comes in and you know object relations, you can say, great, what's your issue? Throw it up on the board. Now, how is that like your family?
Right.
Created perspective.
Right.
When we look at the reality, when we interpret the reality of the current situation.
But I could also go, learning about learning is like, how is that like a tree?
How is that like a tree? Exactly. Ecological thinking. Don't be so anthropocentric.
Dude, that stuff is
Let's
so
do ecological
fucking powerful.
Forget ecological, let's do evolutionary. Let's look at human behavior through an evolutionary perspective. Why do human beings do what they do? Why do they have these instincts? Why do we have these values? Well, we can actually trace through other animals and figure out what's our phylogeny? What is our evolutionary heritage? And what did we inherit from other animals in our evolutionary past? What's new to us? What comes from the primate? What comes from the reptile? What comes from the mammal, right? That's a perspective. And when we look at the world, we get insights. There's an infinite number of perspectives and an infinite number of insights. The ones we choose determine the life we live. Coaching, from my perspective, is having a set of perspectives that you have like a whole toolbox of perspectives, and someone comes in and they've got a particular issue and you go, oh, you know what, if they use this perspective on that, it'll transform it in a way that they can then discover themselves naturally taking better actions.
Right.
And the particular perspectives we have create a specific kind of clearing. There isn't an abstract clearing of consciousness. Each religious tradition creates its own experience of consciousness. If you're doing Zen Buddhism, you end up with a different experience of enlightenment.
Yeah, you go to Freud, you'll have Freudian dreams. You go to Jung, you'll have Jungian dreams.
Exactly, because you never get out of this loop. This is the part where you said, right? We can never get out of it, but we can interrogate various parts of it.
Yes, and that's the biggest difference that's been happening in my coaching. Is that I go, okay, in order for you to see it like that, what are you presupposing, right?
Yes.
Right? Okay, so in order to, so you have to, and I help them along with this. So what I'm hearing you say is that this is opposite of that,